Welcome to NeoAcademia, where the walls of the ivory tower are shifting. I'm your host, Natasha Mott, and this week I explored the psychology of social media with Steve Rathje. Steve is a postdoctoral fellow at NYU in the Social Identity and Morality Lab of J. Van Bavel. His research centers on social media, polarization, and his own TikTok account has over 1 million followers. Steve is an author on a number of research articles and a co-PI on several grants. He's also a contributor to Psychology Today. NeoAcademia is possible first and foremost because of you. I appreciate your support, and if you love what we're doing here, head over to theorygang.io/newsletter for behind-the-scenes footage and bonus content. Thank you for sharing your most valuable resource, your attention. And if you're interested in making better use of your attention, I got you. NeoAcademia is also possible through support from Readocracy. Readocracy is on a mission to save the internet by making how we inform ourselves matter. So they've created a first-of-its-kind technology that rewards people for consuming high-quality content. Readocracy makes the content you consume badges, LinkedIn upgrades, and insights into your information diet. These insights are like a Fitbit for your mind. They can help you understand how your information diet is affecting how you think and feel. Readocracy has won awards and backing from Mozilla and BetaWorks, and is used by curious minds at Stripe, Cisco, Zoom, and over 30 other top companies and schools. NeoAcademia is proud to be sponsored by Readocracy and has a series of collections curated by me and each of our guests on readocracy.com. And for access to the NeoAcademia resource collections, head over to theorygang.io/newsletter for this episode's show notes. Now let's explore. I found you on TikTok, but you're actually an academic and a TikToker, which I found to be exceedingly rare in terms of the academics that actually I think have what you would call like standard success on TikTok.
Yeah, I've been actually trying to persuade more academics to get on TikTok because there was the whole thing when Elon Musk purchased Twitter. All the academics were sort of like leaving Twitter and being like, what social media platform should we join? And I was like, TikTok. Like, I think that like TikTok is such a great way to have science reach people from all around the world who might not have been exposed to science or psychology ever before in their life, just reach a completely different audience. I find that Twitter, which academics really like, you often reach other academics and you also reach journalists. There are a lot of journalists on Twitter, or you reach like college educated liberals. There's a certain type of audience on Twitter, but TikTok has such a broad audience. And I don't know why a lot of academics do seem sort of averse to TikTok. I think there's this perception that it's sort of like a young app, like that it's a Gen Z app. But there are stats that show that a large percentage, it might have been as high as 50%, are like over 30 on TikTok. Like just a lot of people use TikTok now. It's big. And there's also some of the stigma surrounding like the conversations about banning TikTok and China and privacy and everything. And like, I understand that as well. I think it's complicated. I think there are privacy issues with a lot of social media apps, but yeah, I wish it's something more academics would do. And broadly, and I mean, I think you're probably interested in this as well. I think academics should engage more in science communication. Like they should be sharing their taxpayer-funded research with the general public who pays for their research.
I think I'm going to make like a remix track of this podcast of all the people that have come on and said that. Like a broken record. But so I have my hypotheses about why academics don't go on TikTok. And I think if you've been on TikTok for a while, it can feel a little bit lowbrow. And
oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So that's, the big bulk of my hypothesis. It's probably not the big bulk of the reason, but it's the thing I'm most interested in. And then I would say also because it's hard. Tanny Burlow came on here and she said, you have to not give a shit to go on TikTok. You have to really just be okay with looking like an absolute fool.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. The algorithms on TikTok can be really mean. Like they can just be completely harsh. The thing is, I've had some success on TikTok, but I've published nearly like 200 videos at this point. And only about 10 of those have gone really viral and done really well. The majority of my videos like flop, as we call it. Like they don't get seen. I mean, I have enough of a following that like a lot of my videos get seen by a fair amount of people. But I think a lot of people try TikTok out and they make one video and that one video doesn't do so well. So then they get discouraged. When I started this TikTok, I posted like 3 videos the first day I started and I was like, hopefully one of these will succeed. And I was lucky enough that one of the 3 got like 100,000 views. And then the other two didn't do so well. And maybe if I didn't have that early success, I wouldn't have been encouraged to keep going. But I think it's sometimes discouraging that like I try to post really consistently. But yeah, usually I'm stuck with like, you know, the same follower count. I'm not growing. And then I'll just like post 10 or 20 videos and they all won't do like so well. And then after posting a bunch, you eventually get a hit. So I think that's quite frustrating for a lot of people to deal with. So if you just have that mindset, the not giving a shit mindset, just like not caring, and realizing that these algorithms are really harsh and they're just based on watch time, and it's really hard to game what is going to make people watch a video. I can't predict ahead of time whether a video will succeed. I'm actually currently running an experiment with myself where I like predict before I post a video how many views I think the video is going to get. Like I will predict its predicted number of views, and I'm going to run correlations between my predicted view counts and my actual view counts. And I've done this for about like 32 videos now. And I think I haven't run the numbers for a while yet, but I think what I'm seeing is basically it's really hard for me to predict success.
It's humbling. And I think a lot of academics, well, first of all, I think they need to be humbled, but I think they don't want to be humbled. I really think they have like a very fragile ego a lot of times. And I don't want to say all of them, but I think
Yeah.
you know which ones. Like there's a certain
Yeah.
band.
No, I know what you're talking about.
It's the same ones who take everything so seriously, and nothing outside of peer-reviewed publication is worth a shit. It's what I think of as like the academic NPC. You know what I'm saying?
The academic NPC. Wow. Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. And it's a phenomenon I guess I've seen in academia that's a bit frustrating, is I think as academics get older and as they get tenured or as they get higher up the career ladder, they become a bit more defensive about like protecting their pet theories or protecting their prior research. What I see with a lot of younger academics and PhDs and postdocs, which kind of makes me a bit more hopeful, although maybe they'll change once they get older, is they often seem like more open to new theories and new ideas and new ways of doing things. But there definitely is sort of this old guard I see in academia, which also tends to be the kind of academics who might have more of a stigma against science communication. Although it's interesting, a lot of the academics I work with, like my advisors, they're really passionate about science communication. They really care about that stuff. It's mostly like advice I see from other academics. Like I'm applying to professorship positions now and probably over the next few years while I'm a postdoc. And one piece of advice I've seen is like, don't emphasize your science communication too much. Make sure you emphasize your like peer-reviewed work. And I'm trying to do that. And it's true that like, even though like I'm passionate about TikTok and I'm passionate about science communication, I try to really like make the science first, both in my career and in my applications. But it's a bit tricky to cross that line where like, yeah, I do want to talk about in my teaching statement how like I make these science TikToks and this shows like that I have, you know, strengths as a teacher that might be transferable to the classroom when I'm a professor. But I also don't want to seem like, oh, I'm just like an unserious influencer. And I don't want sort of that stigma of being an influencer to affect me. But yeah, I really don't see this quite as much in younger academics. I feel like younger academics sort of understand social media and are becoming more passionate about science communication. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
When you say younger academics, though, you mean not the professoriate. You mean the pre-professoriate,
Yes.
the ones who have yet to be culled, let's say.
I guess that's true. Yeah. And who knows, maybe they'll be selected out of the field or something. Maybe they'll
Well,
leave
you'll get,
academia and they'll
I
become
mean, you're going
science
to get a job.
communicators.
You know, I was like looking at your CV. What did I say?
Hopefully.
Okay, let me pull it. Yeah, no, you're going to get a job. I was looking at your CV and you just started your postdoc though. You're already looking for jobs. Is that in psychology? I don't know how it works, but I also noticed how many publications you had this year after just starting your fucking postdoc. And like, what the hell? Because for me, that don't happen. Like in biomedical science, it's like you don't get a pub till like 4 years into your postdoc.
Oh, I didn't realize you were in biomedical sciences. So
Yeah.
wait, did you do anything psychology leaning, or was it mostly
No, it was molecular.
biological? Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah, I think the publishing norms are a bit faster in psychology. It's also a little bit like it can sometimes be lab dependent, and if you do a lot of collaborations, and also if you're doing things like analyzing existing data. I analyze a lot of existing social media data. You can sometimes publish a bit faster. So it's definitely
Uh,
like lab dependent. And also like I basically did a soft launch on the job market this year. Like I submitted some applications and I'm still submitting some, but I don't really, expect to have I didn't apply to many and I don't expect to have like a job come through very soon. I am still very young and it was mostly sort of a practice year to get my like materials in order, and my advisors sort of encouraged me to try that out. So oftentimes it takes people like, 4 years or something before they can
yeah.
find a good job. So I'd be like perfectly happy if
Okay.
I was like postdocing for a while. I'm still pretty young. I did it like a short PhD as well because it was at Cambridge. So it was just like 4 years. So I still feel like, a few years of postdocing would
Yeah.
benefit me. And I don't mind if I do a couple postdocs or,
Yeah. Yeah.
stay.
I think with each field, each path into academia from whatever sector, there are certain norms. And I think of it as kind of an assembly line. You have to be packaged and primed and prepped, and you have to
Mm,
get these many publications in these journals and work with like this pedigree. And there's all these kind of things that have to happen along the assembly line. And
mhm.
it's interesting. I mean, you have some very high level publications, at least, I mean, science, nature, PNAS this year, like you'll get a job, period.
Thank you.
Um,
Well, I mean, it was nature, human behavior, and science advances. So it's not the nature, science, but thank you.
no.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like last year I did feel quite lucky. I did feel like I had a good year in terms of my publications were accepted at journals I didn't think they would be accepted at. So yeah, and I think that sometimes there is, I mean, it's obviously like a mix of luck and skill, but there can be a lot of luck in terms of like, are you the specific fit for this specific journal? But it's tough. There's a huge like hidden curriculum in academia. It's hard to know like
Yeah.
what is the track record to getting a job. I never really know if I'm like doing anything right. I'm lucky that I think I've had some good mentors to guide me, and then there's so much variability in what schools expect in terms of getting a job. It's like a matter of fit and fit in terms of what you
Right.
study. I also think I have some potential risks. I study social media, which is often not
Yeah.
considered something that's part of human behavior and human psychology. And a lot of like people aren't necessarily open to someone who just studies social media. So I never know, did I take a risk in studying that? It might be a good risk because I do truly believe social media is like growing so rapidly and transforming the world. And I think it is just like something that will be like a hugely growing area of study in psychology. But yeah, it's really hard to know. It's something where like I would love to have an academic job and be a professor. My like ideal career would be to do something like my advisors, Jay Von Bavel, who's my postdoc advisor, and Sander van der Linden, my PhD advisor. They're both like active academics. And then they also write books and they write articles and they communicate their science to the public. I would love to do something like that in my career. That's my ideal. But I certainly have like a lot of backup plans. I would be willing to go into
Really?
industry jobs if there isn't a good fit.
Yeah.
I feel like you have to have a backup plan
I guess you
as
do, but
well.
I mean, I didn't. I was like dead set on being an academic. And then
Oh, okay.
the problem is when I left my PhD lab, I wanted to go to a certain postdoc and it didn't work out. So I kind of took the
Mm-hmm.
backup postdoc. And so I was already like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we're done now. Like, it ain't going to
Mm-hmm.
work out. So I think there's that level too. But if you are relatively unattached and you can go anywhere, you have a much better chance of kind of seeding somewhere, I think. So you were at Stanford.
Stanford for undergrad, Cambridge PhD, and
Oh, right.
NYU postdoc. But yeah, I mean, ideally, I'd be at like a research focus university as opposed to teaching focus. I love teaching, but research is like what I'm like very passionate about. And I don't have huge location restrictions, but obviously preferences in terms of living by the coasts or like a big city and stuff. So
Classic
sometimes when you
liberal.
take those into that thing now, just like the rest of our field. And there's some great non-academic research jobs. Oftentimes those jobs were like at Meta and Twitter until they like fired all the academics working in those companies. But there were some like are some like great alternative academic jobs where people research things like misinformation.
So you said like the hidden curriculum, and I forgot about
Mhm.
this term, but yes, it's a real thing. And I think a lot of people who listen to my podcast aren't academics. So they're kind of looking at academia like what the hell goes on inside that black box.
Mhm.
And the hidden curriculum, I think, is a big things. So maybe you could like pick a couple things that you think are like secret.
I think the absolute most important thing you can do in going into academia, like no question, is choosing like the right advisor and the right lab. And I faced a few challenges in this when I like went to Cambridge. So I went into my PhD at Cambridge right after I graduated from Stanford, and it was through like the Gates Cambridge scholarship. And I was initially going to do a master's, but then an advisor encouraged me to switch it to a PhD. So I went into a PhD much more quickly than I anticipated. And I was with an advisor who was like not the right fit for me. And I think if you are with an advisor who doesn't fit, then I think that just like hurts your chances of doing.
Like more than
And yes,
anything.
more than anything, I think it's the most important thing. And also, yeah, publishing good research about things that you care about. And luckily, I was able to, at least relatively quickly, switch to an advisor who I really, really liked and who I really clicked with about a year into my PhD. But the first year was still, I was figuring things out. So I would say oftentimes people who have a bad experience with academia, which is a lot of people, they didn't like their experience. They left the field of academia. I think most of the variance in that is explained by like having an advisor who was
Yeah.
not the right fit. And I also think
Alright.
it's really hard to be a good advisor. I think the majority of advisors in academia are not very good. And then when you find the one, yeah, there's some like great people and great researchers who are bad advisors. It's just like, it's a different skill. And it doesn't necessarily make you like a bad person. I think it's just really hard to be like a good advisor. So I was just very lucky that I was able to switch to an advisor and to a lab that I really liked. Jay von Babel, my current postdoc advisor, I was already working with him through like a lot of my PhD. I visited his lab. I got to know people in his lab, and that was really good. And when you're in productive lab environments with surrounded by a lot of good students and led by a good advisor, that's where you start to learn like the hidden curriculum. You start to learn all these
Yeah.
things. And yeah, I don't know. I just made so many mistakes early on. And sometimes I had like postdocs or other grad students or advisors who kind of nudged me in the right direction. I wish
Yeah.
we were like more straightforward with this stuff, because I think it just like,
Can't be. You can't be, because it's
yeah.
about gatekeeping, and it's don't, I mean, I don't want to say it's not like that outside as well, because a lot of it is like a filtration process. Just the entire world is hierarchical like that. I'm dealing with like a health insurance thing, and I'm like, oh, they're trying to basically see how many people they can get to not get this procedure. It's everything is a filtration process. But one thing I was thinking is that in this neo-academic world I'm imagining in my mind, which I think is a fun exercise to do, but hopefully becomes a reality, there's gotta be a little bit of like a distribution of activities. You're kind of superhuman in that you're going to do research and you're going to teach and you're going to do TikTok and all that stuff. Like, that's not real. That's a you thing. That's like Elon Musk being like, oh, everybody can start a car company. Like, no, not everybody can do that. You're very special. But the reality is that you're going to have people that are excellent at research, and you're going to have people who are excellent at outreach and excellent at communication.
Mm.
And right now there's no system to reward or incentivize that. So we're going to have to
Right.
share and play nice.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the major things that's not incentivized, like related to that, is like, yeah, good mentorship. Professors are selected based on the quality and output of their research, and they could be terrible mentors, but that stuff isn't, evaluated when you're becoming a professor. But most of what you are when you're a professor is like a manager and a mentor. So I think that absolutely needs to be incentivized. And I also think that academia would really benefit from a bit more of a flat hierarchy, like instead of the tall hierarchy where things are really just like based on the wishes of those on top.
You mean like administrative hierarchy? Like,
I meant if things were more flat instead of more, does my metaphor make sense? More flat instead of like more vertical, where things are really administered. I'm just saying academia would benefit if it were less hierarchical. I feel like a PhD student's career is based so much on their advisor. I think your advisor can have complete power over a PhD student. And that's fine if you have a good advisor, but that's not if you have a bad advisor. And I think it would be better in terms of having a more meritocratic system where talented people can succeed in all labs if we didn't have this like hierarchy. We also have this hierarchy in terms of some institutions and some professors get like so much funding, whereas others do not. And I think we really do need to
I see. It's a
equalize
fat
that.
tail power curve distribution, basically. There's
Absolutely.
a ton
Yeah.
of people with almost nothing, and then like the top of the top gets everything, basically. Yeah,
Yeah.
agree with that. I think one of the things that could potentially fix that is if professors weren't walking around their PhD students like dogs, which I feel like they do in a sense. It's like, this is my little pet. I got to groom this pet and I got to take care of this pet. And I'm not saying like all of them do, but I think there's also a self propagation aspect of this. So if you do well, your professors do well. So I think that's a little bit of the corruption in it as well, that they want to steer you and hold you in this direction that you have to kind of go in that. So I think there's
Right.
danger in that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that I feel like the more senior of an academic you become, the more like your career is just based on like recruiting good grad students and
Yep.
postdocs in your
Yep.
lab who are doing like the majority of the work. And then it's based on a lot of the talent that you recruit. I think it would be nice if it weren't based on that and we would like have more students working with like a diverse amount of collaborators and
Mhm.
also just like allowing their individual success to shine rather than being like branded as a part of a lab. And yeah, again, a lot of like people who are going into PhD programs don't know this. They don't know how much your choice of advisor matters for like the rest of your career. It's certainly something I didn't know early on.
We only have one way of building reputation,
Hmm.
and that is through what you publish. And I think that
Hmm.
is part of the issue as well, that that's the only thing that really counts, truly. I mean,
Hmm.
the rest of the stuff you have to do, but it's not going to make or break you. And it's funny to me how academics kind of scoff at metrics and KPIs and all this stuff, which are starting to make their way into academia, but they're much more in the corporate sphere. They kind of scoff at that, but yet they have their own system. Like I noticed you have a score thing on your
Oh, altmetric. Yes.
altmetric. Oh, okay, altmetric. Yeah, the H index, and it's
Hmm.
so don't come at me telling me, oh, metrics don't really convey what I do. It's like, well, then why do you keep relying on them?
Right. I mean, the metrics are all flawed, but I guess people need heuristics. And there's some heuristics that work better than others, but something like people certainly do is they use like the journal that you publish in as a heuristic. If you publish in Nature as opposed to PLOS ONE, people might assume like, oh, that might be like higher quality because like the editors and reviewers thought it was like higher quality. And they might look at it just simply because we don't have time to like read all those papers. So I do somewhat understand using it as a heuristic. I think things like citation count or alt metric are worse heuristics because citation count might simply mean that you are like,
Sexy.
yeah, I mean, or that you're publishing in a field where a lot of people are publishing it. In some ways, like my citation count has benefited from publishing on misinformation and social media because these are sort of hot topics that a lot of other academics are publishing on. If you're publishing on a less popular topic, but you're still doing like incredible work, you will have like a lower citation count. And then altmetric just measures media exposure, which is like just like how clickbaity is your study, how much did the
Right.
media like your study. So that's not a great measure either.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what we were talking about the kind of the hidden curriculum and finding your mentor, the thing that they do is they teach you all of this stuff and they tell you, unfortunately, yes, and you're in psychology, so you understand heuristics, but I, was in a molecular biology, so I didn't even
Mhm.
I didn't even read like Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow till I left grads or till I left academia. No, I hadn't opened my eyes to any of it. I didn't even
Mhm.
I read nothing about the philosophy of science. I was just reading papers and papers and papers, because that's part of the trick of getting ahead in academia is you have to drill into your subject area, and there's all these tricks. But I will say this about academic mentorship. There's nothing like it. Like, you'll never find, when you have a good academic mentor, you'll never find anything like that. Because in the corporate world, your boss, sure, they want you to succeed, but there's also like a competitiveness, a sense that they don't want you to kind of like take their job. Whereas in the academic world, you're never going to take their job, but they want you to get your own. So then
Mhm.
there's this battle of collaborating with them and carving out a niche a little bit more. So
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
very interesting dynamic that should be lifelong. And I think it can be if you stay in academia. But that's one thing I
Mhm.
really, really miss. about being in academia is that closeness with
Okay.
someone who
Yeah.
knows what they're doing and has done this successfully. You know,
Yeah.
it's a track.
No, I agree with you. I feel like it's one of those cases, like if you find a good mentor, it's really good. And if you find a bad mentor, it's really bad in academia. Again, because they have so much sort of power and sway, I think that's kind of what amplifies that. So that's why I think like some people's perceptions of academia can be so polarized. And I feel like I've seen some of the very bad of it and I've seen some of the very good. So yeah, I mean, I am just grateful that I'm in like a positive situation right now. And I recognize that a lot of people are not. And I wish we could improve the situations.
Oh, it's going to change. It's
So,
just, it's kind of like, how is it going to change? It's kind of what I'm trying to figure out here is like,
mhm.
how's it going to change? And what can we do on the outside that's a little different than the big behemoth of
Yeah.
academia itself? How can we kind of massage things from the outside a little bit? So that's kind of what I'm looking at. But
I'm interested in your neo-academia approach because it's more like it seems more focused on changing things from the outside as opposed to the inside. Or are you trying to do a little bit of both as well?
I
Um,
don't think so. I think my
okay.
approach, and this is exploratory, it's
Yeah.
largely me just trying to figure it out. And I think with the next season, this is actually the last episode. So you're closing out the first
Oh,
season.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So
Okay.
I'll come back in a couple months. But this was just like an exploration for me
Okay.
because I always wanted to be an academic. And then when I kind of saw
Yeah.
what it was like, I was like, oh, wait, no, this is not actually friendly for me. It's not the dream that I thought it
Mhm.
would be. It's not what it wasn't what I wanted. And I think with people who have like a wide variety of interests, it's not going to work for them because you have pretty diverse interests within your niche. But I'm certainly not going to be allowed to study physics very much. I'm not going to be
Mhm.
allowed to study psychology. I'm a molecular biologist and I have to dig down into molecular biology. So with NeoAcademia, what I think I'm doing is exploring all different facets of what's going on inside and finding people who are really still genuinely curious. I think a lot of people are dead inside. Um, seriously. And trying to find people who have a spark still to make things better and incorporate changes that we all agree need to happen. Like, for
Yeah.
example, science communication. We all agree, but yet there's like nobody really making a concerted effort to like force the universities to use some of that money to do it properly. Like,
Yeah.
no one's doing that. So that's kind of the things that I'm exploring here.
I love that. Yeah.
Well, and also another thing I want to do, another branch I might start with the next season is just getting people like you who do research
Mhm.
and who want exposure in a sense to
Mhm.
come on and talk about the research because the more that I dig in TikTok, I see like there's a ton of people actually who are trying to get exposure. They're just not,
Right.
and they ain't getting it
Yeah.
yet. So
Yeah. You have to do all sorts of tricks to get exposure through TikTok. You have
So
to,
let's talk about your
you know,
TikTok, by the way.
yeah.
The psychology of your TikTok. Like, first of all, it's a
Mhm.
brand. It's a brand. I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
you
guess.
know it's a brand, but it's a brand.
Steve Psychology, Dr. Steve. Yeah, no, it's certainly a brand. I think I try to like maintain like a niche. I sort of advice that a lot of people give you on TikTok is like have a niche so that people like when they follow you, they have a reason to follow you. They kind of know what to expect. They know like, oh, you do psychology videos. I'm interested in psychology. I'll follow you for more psychology videos. So I feel like if I went all over the place and I was like, this is my life, these are my hot takes about celebrities and stuff, then people would be like, why am I following you? And they wouldn't engage. I used to have a TikTok for 6 months that was just me posting about random things before I like started Steve Psychology. And then like after that, I very intentionally was like, okay, I'm gonna make like a psychology TikTok account. And it of course grew like much more fast than my other account that had like 600 followers because it was just me posting random things. So yeah, no, I certainly agree it's a brand. And then the psychology of it, I mean, the part of why I study in my research is actually the psychology of like what goes viral on the internet. Like that's a huge question I'm really interested in. And I think it's a really important question because the things that go viral online are the things that end up being seen by most people. We live in an attention economy and the algorithms choose to show people what they watch the most, what they engage with the most. And I mean, a lot of my research isn't that positive. It's shown things like if we dunk on a member of our out group or if we post something that is highly negative or contains moral outrage, it's more likely to go viral. So it's like outragement leads to engagement. It's sort of that kind of
Okay.
motto. Oftentimes it can be like negative stuff or stuff that feeds into some very basic emotions that go viral.
But
But
the
I don't do
irony
that.
is you don't do
Yeah.
that. You're the
Yeah.
most like I watched quite a bunch of them in a row. And the one thing I think, I mean, your brand is very neutral. Your brand is a
Mm,
bit formal. It's, you
yeah.
have a tone when you speak and you can tell you choose your words carefully.
Mm.
But I was so glad when I saw that you had so many followers because I'm like, this is really chill. Like it's pretty, it's I think a great start for people to see that it doesn't have to all be polarizing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But sometimes videos that do well on psychology TikTok are if you like fact check someone. There's a lot of ridiculous psychology misinformation on the app. And if you fact check someone or if you respond to a hate comment in a kind of sassy way, that will get more engagement. And I think people are like, ooh, drama, they're like feuding. And I really try not to lean into that as too much. Sometimes I've done it. I've never tried to get like too intense. But yeah, I mean, I think what has been nice for me, and I think also good for like my mental health, is I do keep my brand, as you say, like a little bit neutral, and I try to really make the science come first. And I think that's good because like I think it can be stressful being a public figure and always like saying these are my hot takes and then having people comment on your personality and your opinions and your looks and everything. And people don't do that as much with me. They mostly
Also
comment
called
on the
being a woman.
science. Yeah, that's true, and women face it, like, way more on the internet. But yeah, I mean, I face a lot of, like, anti-gay stuff on TikTok, especially, like, when I was like, "Here's some psychology studies related to LGBT things." I didn't even say, like, I was gay, but, like, I had just, like,
You
some
just said the word.
LGBT-related science, and I got, like, masses of people saying they were unfollowing me, and I was like, "Why were you following me in the first place?" Like, I don't get this, and it's because people from all around the world, and a lot of places around the world are less accepting of gay people. They follow me because like of some scientific study that is like pretty like universal and seems to like transcend like a lot of other things. And it's sort of nice because like my account is often about content curation. Like I pick some of the best psychology studies that I think people will find most enjoyable. And then there's the communication element. I'm like, how do I package this in the most interesting way? But I think the content comes first. Like the study I'm sharing comes first. And if I share an interesting study and I communicate it in a semi-interesting way, usually the video will do well. And it's kind of nice. Like I feel like it becomes less about me, and it's like I think I've never been like. Some people ask, "Have you been like recognized walking down the streets of New York from your TikTok?" And I'm like, "You know, that's never
Standard
happened." And
white
I think
guy.
that's yeah, because I just look like a basic white guy.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is I think people pay less attention to me and they pay more attention to the science, which I
100%.
kind of like because like I think I would get nervous if people were paying attention to me. I get to keep some distance, and that's the thing that you get to have more as like an academic or a science communicator, depending on how you communicate your science, because people have different approaches. But if you put less of yourself forward, then people will pay attention more to the content. And I think personally that's works best for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're successful at it. And I just noticed it because I've watched several of your videos. And I feel like you always have like a format in a sense, like you have something above your head, which I think
Mm.
also kind of distracts from like your visage in a sense. And
Uh,
the background is like this neutral color as well. And you know who Lex Fridman is?
I
I mean,
do,
who
yeah.
doesn't? It's like
Yeah.
he's so self-effacing. We talk about this all the time. And the reason why he gets such great guests is because they know he's not going to push back on him. He's also like a big ass kisser, which annoys the shit out of me.
Yeah.
But it's like there's this brand of being like self-effacing in a sense so that the topic or the person or basically the thing that you're, I don't want to say selling, but yeah, selling is the highlight and not you.
I mean, I think part of what makes Lex an interviewer people like is, and I think this is also Rogan as well, is they just come across as like regular people who are like intellectually humble and appeal to a lot of regular people. And I know a lot of people criticize them for like their bad takes. I personally like am critical of Rogan for his anti-vax misinformation and all of this that stuff. And I don't think I love them like as people or for their opinions, but I do think that they are good interviewers because they
Mhm.
ask kind of simple, intellectually humble questions that really just start at the basics.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think people like that. So
Do you know Huberman? Like you were at Stanford, you know
I
Huberman, right?
do. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I like. I mean, I listen to his podcast. And, I mean, I think he's a great science communicator.
Yeah. I saw one of your people that
Yeah,
I was like, Zaki as well. Like I think you had a collaboration with,
yeah,
yeah, at Stanford.
yeah. No,
I
Zaki is amazing.
Yeah, he was one of the people that I think I can't
Hmm.
remember when my giant like postdoc search. He was like I was broadening to do. Actually, I ended up getting some constructs from the Diceroff lab for my postdoc. It's really into optogenetics, and so it was kind of cool to see that like kind of cross back with you. You're probably like the first person I've actually talked to in this format that the closest person to kind of like neuroscience and what I used to do. So it was like a
Mm.
little bit like coming home, but this
Okay, so wait, the stuff you were doing with like leaning more neuro, were you considering
yeah.
Jamil as like a
I
postdoc?
don't think
Because
not seriously. I was just
yeah.
looking at what he does, and actually, I worked in Chuck Roselli's lab at OHSU,
Hmm.
and he was the guy who did the gay rams. Basically, you don't remember this? The
I don't
base,
actually know it.
basically, it was like kind of like the groundbreaking, like being gay is biological study,
Oh
and
wow. Okay.
I think GLAD was upset that he was doing it, and they
Oh
teamed up with PETA and like harassed him. And you know how Oregon is. Like you can't do shit.
yeah.
And he was working on giant rams. It was awful. It was part of the reason why I hated the lab. I was interested in the affective circuitry and wondering if there are differences between not only males and females, but also male oriented, female oriented.
Mm,
Right. So,
mm.
so anyways, that's what I was interested in
That
before
sounds
in
so
that stuff.
cool.
I mean, I
Uh,
thought it was cool. I did not realize how fucking controversial it would be. Because
yeah.
I
I
too
think it's
forget that people don't accept gay people, like, I forget.
I forget too, I'm in New York and like I feel like everyone I know is gay or bi or whatever, it's yeah, but that's so cool. And that's interesting that like GLAD was like against sometimes I find there's this thing where like some of these like LGBT rights organizations will go against some like scientific paper about LGBT stuff that I think is like really interesting and helps contribute to our understanding of like why are people gay and like where does sexual orientation come from, which I think would actually help people understand gay people. And I think it would ultimately help overcome stigma if we
Right.
understood the science behind these things.
The problem though is the left is it is anti-science once you go far enough left. They really are because they're afraid of it. Because what happens when you discover what the biological cause of gayness is? What if there's a gene? What if we can cure
Mm,
it? Should we cure it? Then they're dealt with all these
yeah.
ethical questions. And this was the problem with COVID with the left is they had to contend with ethical questions and meet that with science and decide that science is not God, right? Like it's not, we can't base all of our ethical decisions on science. It's not the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
There's different types of truth. And I think when you go far enough left, you're like floating in the quantum realm a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these studies about like the effects of political ideology versus political extremism, I think one study shows like as you get farther right, you get more dogmatic usually. But there's also a slight effect of like as you get to the extreme left, you get more dogmatic. And I think you definitely see more science denial on the right and on the extreme right. But I think you can also see effects of ideological extremism on both sides. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with like Dan Kahan's work? Is it Kahan at Yale?
yeah, no, I am familiar with his work. His work is interesting. My former PhD advisor has debated a lot with him, and I
Oh,
think
really?
disagreed. Yeah, I mean, because he was one of the big people on motivated reasoning, and he basically argued that like the more like reflective and intelligent you become, the better you are at like justifying your beliefs and
Oh
like
yeah.
engaging in motivated reasoning. My Sander van der Linden, my former PhD advisor, I think he disagreed with that. And I think as more studies are coming out, I think we're finding a little bit less evidence for that hypothesis. Like I think generally what researchers find is like reasoning is a good thing,
Mhm,
basically. Like reasoning and intelligence usually leads to more accurate beliefs.
mhm.
I think
Yeah.
lawyers who are really intelligent can justify ridiculous things. But if you have an accuracy goal, if you're like a scientist, we should say scientists, for the most part, they're motivated by accuracy. Sometimes they have other motives. I think
Mm.
then you should usually use your reasoning to try to get closer to the truth.
You said
Yeah,
should,
no,
though.
I mean, I I would say for the most part, science does a good job at that, but also has its flaws. I think it does better than journalism,
Yeah.
better than law. My postdoc advisor, Jay Van Davel, has sort of argued that sort of the institutions and norms of science do help prevent against motivated reasoning. We have a peer review process, and a lot of people criticize peer review, but I think it's like generally good to have like kind of contrarian experts like engage with debate about your research. I think for the most part, some form of peer review is good. Like we do have institutional norms, and we have certain things that I think protect against making science like completely like devoid of accuracy in the way
So,
that like sometimes journalists or politicians and other people can sway the truth a bit more.
well, here's my issue with this, and I love that we're getting into this because this is the fun part for me.
Yep.
So, a lot of people in psychology like to talk about implicit bias, but
Mhm.
then I feel like they neglect the concept of implicit bias when it comes to things that they may be implicitly biased towards. I mean, so this is the
Mm,
problem with science in general. We are the observer and the observing. Like, this is the
mhm.
problem ultimately that we're having with science when we try to look at ourselves. But when you're talking about scientists and motivated reasoning, they are motivated to believe that they are motivated by reason. You know what I mean? They're not
Yeah,
motivated.
that's true. That's fair.
But also, same thing with peer review. When the peer review system seems to work for you, then it's like it's working. But also, there's a lot of things about peer review that absolutely suck. And one of those things is, negative findings.
Y-
You don't get it published
Yeah.
anywhere. It's like the Winston Churchill saying, democracy sucks, except when you think about anything other than democracy. I love my paraphrasing of Winston Churchill. I'm not saying to trash it. I'm just saying that we can't be so dogmatic and say
Yes.
this works and like we can't consider
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I certainly agree. And to check my biases, like I am still in science. I might be biased to believe that science is good and reasonable and gets us closer to the truth. And I've also had relatively positive experiences with peer review. And I would say, even with some of my like worst peer reviewers who have trashed my papers, I've learned something from them. So, like, I think feedback from as many people as possible who are educated experts is usually good. There is corruption. There are issues. There are a lot of institutional failures, I believe. And I think scientists have a lot of individual biases. I mean, scientists like might have a pet theory and they might run studies that always support their pet theory. But then sometimes you have a different group of scientists who have a completely different theory, and then they will argue with each other. And then through this debate, there will sometimes be like some truth that emerges. I've been involved in academic debates. I'm currently participating in adversarial collaboration moderated by like
Wow.
the Center for Adversarial Collaborations, and me and
That's
some other
fun.
scientists are collaborating with a competing team of scientists who have different hypotheses. And I think that like we have different beliefs and we probably have different motivations based, and we probably have motivated reasoning. But I think through some of these debates, we can get closer to the truth. And I mean, again, I'm not saying it's like perfect. This is like ideally how the system should work. So there should be some deliberation. There should be people who are checking their biases, institutions, and a system that's checking biases. And sometimes that can fail. But from what I've seen, science seems to be doing a better job at getting toward the truth than other institutions and
Yeah.
systems and think tanks and
Oh, I
other places.
agree. I agree 100%. It's why I still identify as a scientist because that's the best we got so far. It certainly works better than
Yeah.
like consulting my crystals. Okay. So speaking of consulting crystals, so one thing I was thinking when I was listening to your TikToks is that you give these studies, you give a lovely overview. And I was thinking about what's next, because you see all these things coming out about the creator economy, and this is what happened
Hmm.
in 2022 and what happened in 2021. And I'm thinking, what's next in like 2025? Where are we going to be in terms of creators? Because hopefully you'll have spelled out every single psychology experiment worth mentioning by then. But
Oh no, I'll run out of material.
no, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you won't, because the things that I think are missing from TikTok, especially, is like that next layer of depth on almost everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because, you gave out a study here, but like I was thinking about the problem with giving people information, like the Dunning-Kruger type effect, that they're like armed with,
Mm,
Stephen Psychology's
mm.
information about psychology. And I'm like a junior professor now. And, they kind of fall into this trap of believing that they know a lot of shit.
Yeah.
They know the top line of
Yeah.
the study and not all the
Yeah.
debate around it. So I hope that's
Uh-huh.
next.
Who knows if TikTok's even around by then, given all the debates about banning TikTok. I
Ain't
do
going
think that
nowhere.
like short form video is definitely growing. I think that, social media started as text and then it moved to pictures with Instagram and now it's on video. And I think people ultimately find video most engaging. But it's true, people are demanding long form content more. And people are saying that like video essays on YouTube are becoming popular again. And obviously podcasts have been popular for a while. I love podcasts. I love the long form, getting in depth. It's almost like instead of reading a book by an author, I'll read their podcast interview and I'll be like, okay, I got it. So like, honestly, who knows? But I think we'll continue to see a rise of short form video. I love long form. I don't know if people have the attention span
Right.
for it. Who knows? It would be nice if we had some way to get the attention span back. We might have AI created content pretty soon. We might have like ChatGPT and like all these like
Oh, yeah.
advances in AI creating content better than humans can create it. So I guess that's one prediction
Yeah,
for the
100%.
future.
I saw Greg Eisenberg. I didn't even know who this was until today. I think he's like a YouTuber. I don't know where he came from, but he said, I was reading a Substack and he said, like, basically in 2023, you need to be super fucking unique. He didn't swear. Of course, that's me adding it. But because otherwise, if AI can do it, they're going to do it better than you, more articulate, more whatever. So you better bring the juice.
Kind of
Steve.
scary, honestly. And yeah, I mean, I think TikTok is becoming more competitive. I think when I started it in 2020, I think it was easier to like succeed. I think
Yeah.
my videos were amplified a bit more. I'm seeing some growth on my account again, but like I go through long periods of stagnation. I think there are just more people on it. I think the creator economy was very hyped for a while, but I think the creator economy is actually dying a bit
Yeah,
as a lot of creators
dwindling
are
or
realizing they can't make any money unless you're at the
right.
very top, or if you're able to draw traffic to your business or do something very creative, you can. But yeah, it's really hard to make money as a creator.
This is the problem I'm running into with like thinking about NeoAcademia, because I've got all these little places where I can make money, but I'm like patchworking together a
Yeah,
salary in a sense.
yeah.
And most people cannot do that. Like there's the patronage model and there's all these different models you can do. But the reason academia functions so well, it is partly because of the bureaucracy of it. And there's a track, these are the places where
Mhm.
my great great grandfather academically got published and got grants from, and he taught my academic daddy how to do this. And so yeah, like, I can't believe the
My
rant
academic
running on
daddy, is that your
that.
what you call your academic advisor?
Academic daddy, that don't say that.
I mean, nepotism in academia is a thing. There's like a study showing that like 25% of professors had parents who like were in
Yeah.
academia. It's just like
That's why it's so
one of the
dry.
yes, one of the big keys to succeeding. It's kind of like film and TV with nepo babies. Is
Yeah.
like you need to have parents who are professors. With some of the top performing academics, you'll learn that their parents were professors, and that probably gave them a head start and learning the hidden curriculum and learning all sorts of things. So academia is such a mystery to people outside of it. Like, again, I really had no idea about academia until partway through my PhD. It was even at undergrad, it was so opaque.
It's eye-opening. I mean, when I was an undergrad, I think I had like a total switch. I'm first in my family to go to college. And so when I walked onto the
Mhm.
campus, first of all, I was free. I'm like, I'm free. I have to work to support
Yeah.
my ass. But I'm walking around and I'm sitting in the bookstore and I had a chai latte and I opened my books and I'm like, I have 4 hours to read this book and learn shit. And that's yes. And
Yeah.
so I thought, and then I went to class and there were all these wonderful conversations where I was just like feeding off these professors. And then someone's like, yeah, you could probably do this for like a career. And I'm like, what? And then so you go and get your PhD and then you realize, oh no, this is different.
Yeah.
We're not frolicking through the
No.
flowers in the courtyard here.
My time in undergrad was so idyllic, especially like Stanford was like sunny palm trees, beautiful campus and everything. And just like psychology classes were so well taught, and I was taking philosophy classes. It was amazing. And certainly that transition from learning to then the PhD and the difficulties of
PhD.
producing science, which is so different because your day to day as like a PhD student is like you're submitting ethics approvals or you're coding in R or you're debugging. So much of it is not really about the content or the knowledge. It's about the craft of creating science, which is so hard. And you're not thinking
Yes.
about big ideas most of the time. You're thinking about the very like nitty gritty.
Minute.
And what TikTok allows me to connect to is kind of that like joyous thing I had in college where I was learning so many things and I felt so inspired. And like I get most of my content ideas, maybe not most, but a lot of them from like what I learned in college from those intra-psych classes and stuff. You know, the other stuff, you know, is from reading papers and Twitter and everything. That's where I get the other ideas. But yeah, I try to like, sometimes I sit down and I'm like, what did I learn in my intro-psych classes or intro philosophy classes? Oh, I'll make a TikTok about that. Because those intro classes select like best, most engaging studies that have lasted the test of time. And then those are the studies that do best on TikTok, I've found, are the classics.
That's probably why my TikTok doesn't do well, because that's not what I'm
Oh, you have a
interested in.
TikTok?
I do. I do.
How
It's
cool.
all
I
over
need
the
to
place.
follow you.
Well, okay, good. And then I'll tag you in something, but then I need
Okay.
your advice for growing my brand, because obviously I suck at it. Like I'm the exact opposite of you. I'm like all personality. So it's like it's wrong.
But that really works for some people. Like
I don't want it. I don't want it to
Yeah.
work for me. And I'm like all personality, and then people like critique my personality. And I'm like, no.
that's what I hate. I hate the critiques of my personality.
Right.
But yeah.
So here's what I like my experience in grad school, the juicy moments, because you're right. A lot of time it was pipette. For me, it's pipetting, it's editing, it's writing a grant, it's dealing with spreadsheets and reading some fucking manual for a god awful piece of equipment and then troubleshooting the god awful piece of equipment. It was awful, but the moments that were beautiful was like journal club. I remember I picked a journal club article about genetically modified corn, and I picked one about acupuncture. And everybody was pissed because our department was very interdisciplinary. It was cell biology, neurobiology, and anatomy. It was like the weirdest department. But everyone's like, really? We're going to read about genetically modified corn? And I was so excited because I'm like, I know nothing about this. And now I'm going to go down this awful rabbit hole. And the study turned out to be absolute bunk because it wasn't about corn at all. It was about the pesticide exposure. Every one of these articles that I did, it was just so fascinating. But this is why I think my TikTok doesn't do well, because I go down these crazy rabbit holes, very deep, very broad. And everyone's like, what the fuck is she talking about now?
Some rabbit hole TikToks do well. Like I have one of my mutuals, I forgot who talks about like blimps and how there are only like 25 blimps left in the United States and like just like gives so much detail. And I found it so fascinating. And I think those are her most viral videos. They're about blimps. And I think that's just like so weird and quirky and such an interesting fact because like I feel like I've seen blimps and it's weird that there are so few in the United States. So I think sometimes you can do well with like quirky and nation specific. I mean, I think what does well is sort of like novelty, weirdness, emotion, surprise, things like that. I have to be accurate and not clickbaity, but like you also have to really simplify, short, simple, fast, things like that. Yeah, that stuff's really hard. And that's something academics are not really trained in doing, is like communicating in a simple way. I kind of started science communication before I like started academia. Like in college, I was writing popular science articles for Psychology Today and The Guardian and various places. And I learned that kind of writing before I learned academic writing. And I think that was helpful for me because I was like, okay, I know before I even like kind of learned about the ropes of research, I learned how to write psychology for public. I think being trained in science communication helps you as an academic. I think it helps you write better journal articles as well. People who are communicating science to the general public tend to write much more readable journal articles, I find.
Oh, yeah, they do. And this is where I think that academics could do well to be trained by people outside of what they're doing, because I don't think that they should be completely separate jobs. But wouldn't it be cool if you had like a departmental science communication person? Why can't we have that? Where somebody knows your research intimately. They only have about 5 labs that they study, and their job is to publicize that content. I mean, put it in your fucking F&A for your grant. Like, you should be able to do, you know what I mean? And then can you imagine like seeing your research actually put into those terms? Because like, you know how it is to get a PR, a press release about your work. You probably had that happen, right? You've
Yeah.
citing work. It doesn't happen very often in biology, but I remember
Mm.
we had one for this alcohol study we did, and everybody in the lab was like, oh my gosh, like real people are reading our stuff. And
Mhm.
you look at it and you go, that's what we did? Okay. Yeah, I guess that's, we injected rats with alcohol and saw what happened to their stress axis after puberty. And then you read it in this other form and you're like, okay, it does something to you to realize that what you're doing can be put in other words.
Yeah.
Simpler.
Was it a good press release? Because sometimes like
Yeah.
press officers will misunderstand the science or they won't write about it
Yeah, it was
super
good.
well.
Mhm.
That happened. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I think I've only had one press release for a study at Cambridge, and the press person was really good and kind of like worked with me and the other authors, and we kind of like were like, oh, this is right and this is wrong, and like we were able to sort of help edit him, and it was awesome, and he helped publicize that paper a lot and get it like a lot of media attention. So that was cool, and yeah, I love your idea of having like science communicators who like work with academics.
That should be a thing, you know? And I think it would be like good for the health of the university as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. And in psychology too, psychology is one of those fields where it has the most demand for science communication. People are like, I think there was a study that showed that of the types of science articles that are covered by the media or that people share on like Reddit, it's like psychology articles. For
Yeah.
one, it's that people are interested in other people, like
Or
just
themselves.
innately. I think I think it's a bit harder for, I guess, like if you do molecular stuff or cell stuff or all of that stuff. I still think we should encourage it. When I have physicists talk about the universe on my TikTok For You page and like particles and everything, I'm so fascinated. I love that when like we have good science communication about physics or biology and
Well, that's
stuff like
interesting
that, the
because
hard topics.
that's an interesting spectrum that I hadn't considered before, because you're right. Like physicists, it's almost so abstract that you're
Mhm.
captivated in the same way that like psychology captivates you because it's
Yeah.
so intimate. It's like,
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
like you're
Yeah.
so far removed from it that there's this wonder and awe.
Yeah.
And then with psychology, you're like, yeah, that's me. And I kind of intuitively knew that, or I'm
Yeah.
surprised to hear that. But then you think about like biology and it's basically like CP325 does,
Yes.
genetically, it's like, it's fucking the worst. I failed at choosing my profession.
Biology is really tough to communicate unless it like has some implications, like exercise is good for your brain or alcohol is good for your whatever. Like that's the stuff that I feel like gets communicated in the popular press, but some of it is so niche and it's tough. And yeah, it is true. The physics gets at the abstract wonder, and psychology, I feel like psychology studies always have like a set number of reactions. This proves what I knew all along. Haha,
Yeah.
the science proves it. The science proves that my political opponents are stupid or that whatever, like something that I wanted to believe. Or people will
Yeah.
say, oh, that doesn't sound right. That must be like a bad study because that disagrees with my priors. Or people will like something because it's surprising. Like, wow, that's so cool. So you kind of get this set of like 3 reactions to
Yeah, you do.
psychology articles,
Yeah,
I
you get the
find.
positive, negative, and like
Yeah.
the I don't care or neutral. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, that's so obvious. Why did they have to do a study about it? It's like,
That's my favorite. Like on my other podcast, my co-host always says stuff like that. He's like, I don't understand why they do. I'm like, the only reason we can say this now definitively is because
yeah.
somebody did like 10 experiments.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fun stuff though. But yeah, I think about like the social media stuff so much because it's just fascinating to kind of like watch people. Have you looked into like the lives at all on TikTok?
Yeah. And I've done a few TikTok lives as well, and I think they're really fun. Yeah.
But have you seen people doing the matches and stuff?
Oh, yeah. Where people do those like tournaments against each other. Is that what you're
Mhm,
talking
mhm,
about? Yeah. Those are weird. I don't quite get those.
mhm.
I'm not.
Oh,
Yeah.
I did like a
What
deep
do you,
dive. You'll have to watch
okay.
episode 8 of my other podcast, Syllogism, on last season. Because that was we do a challenge every week, and the challenge was to go live on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, it's a whole other world. And then because of that, I actually looked into kind of like the gifting aspect of TikTok and like how much what's the exchange, the currency exchange? And it was very obscure and hard to find the information. But
Doesn't TikTok take like 70%? Isn't it something
yes,
like absurd like
yes.
that?
And I think
Yeah.
I'm the person who actually made that popular, understanding the actual percentage of it because,
Wait,
um,
really? Did
yeah, I
that
think
number
so.
originate from you?
66 point,
Wow.
yeah,
Did you
66
post a
point something.
TikTok about this? How did this
I
like get
did.
out there?
Yeah.
Oh, so
Yeah.
I assume that went viral then?
It did, but it mostly went viral because people were mad at me. I thought it would be like, people are so glad they know. Like, I didn't realize I was pouring all my money into it. But I had million plus creators coming and being like, you're just jealous. You're not getting enough. Like, you're greedy. But I did kind of have a hook that sometimes I say shit really sounds bad. My husband's like, your delivery sucks, because I was in a live and it was like on ABC Media or something. And I'm watching people gift ABC, they're gifting money. And so I took a screenshot of like the people at the top because it shows like the top gifters. And I
Mhm.
said, if this is you, if you're a top gifter, I'm not following you. And like, I know it was a little like aggressive, but it was like, and then I tried to be like concerned. I'm like, here's why. Cause like, I don't want you to throw your money away on me or anyone else. But yeah,
That's a
people,
good hook though. I mean,
if you're a villain,
TikTok incentivizes like controversial hooks. You always have to start with like a little bit of like controversy or intrigue or whatever. I mean, it's definitely a strategy that works if you're able to withstand the backlash. Like
I'm always the villain. Always.
okay, I love it. Villain era. Like that's
In
great.
life,
That's like
villain life. Like,
that's an approach. Yeah. I think I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to
that
like
sucks.
withstand. I sometimes I keep my hooks like mildly controversial or intriguing, but I want to avoid being trolled on social media.
Oh, dude,
And
they
I
hate
mean,
me.
it's really a shame that we have to like worry about that. I think the internet creates really bad trolling dynamics where people will
Yeah.
all go after one person. And I
Mhm.
think we live in constant fear that like if we say something the wrong way, especially if you have a bit of a platform or if you engage with the public, that people will troll you. It's
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
scary. And I think it's not a great dynamic. I just read this book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson. It was really good. We actually read it from my lab book club. Like my postdoc lab has a book club that's really
Preparing for
fun.
it.
Yes, preparing to be publicly shamed. And he talks about it was written like a few years ago. So he was talked about all these cases where people got publicly shamed. Like Justine Sacco was like a case where she made like a kind of a bad joke on the internet and she had 140 Twitter followers. And then she went on an 11-hour plane ride and she got off the plane and she was trending on Twitter. The entire internet was against her. She lost her job. It was like a whole, and sort of for making a bad joke that was pretty like, it was like a distasteful joke, but even for like offensive jokes, you don't necessarily deserve that or think that your joke will be seen by the entire world. She had 140 followers. And John Ronson was sort of arguing that the internet is creating these dynamics where we're kind of like afraid to be provocative anymore, or we're like, it's incentivizing this kind of this neutrality and this fearful way of putting things. Unless you are certain figures like Donald Trump or Elon Musk who kind of live for the outrage and you lean into the negative attention. We do have figures like that. But then for a lot of us, we lean into like okay, I will avoid saying potentially controversial things. And you have to sort of frame what you're saying so anyone from any walk of life from the entire world might not misinterpret you. It sort of eliminates context where like
Yeah.
someone might have the context to understand what you're saying isn't offensive, but someone else might take what you're saying completely out of context. So
Well, this is the thing. It's creating a global monoculture, basically.
mm,
And
mm,
the figures like, me or, anybody
mm,
who's incendiary, it's not that we're villains. It's that we're speaking to a certain type of person. And that is almost shameful now. You're not allowed to speak to certain types of people unless you're certain types of people. Then that's fine. But if you kind of isolate your audience and say, I'm only talking to these people, let's use Elon Musk. He has a way of doing things that is his own way. And he's being criticized now for doing things the Elon Musk way that everybody loved a while ago. And I think a lot of this is like the anti-billionaire sentiment as well, like the anti-capitalist. They're looking for anything to bury these people. But
But I do think Elon Musk has generally made some bad decisions recent. Like, I think he has Twitter
oh yeah,
brain, basically. Twitter brain is like
yeah,
when Twitter becomes your world and you're way too affected by the incentives. And I
literally.
think he's I mean, I think he's always been a risk taker, and I think becoming more of a billionaire gives him enough financial security where he can become enough of a risk taker. Honestly, his psychology is so confusing to me because for a while I was like, oh, whatever he's doing, maybe it's part of his calculated genius. But slowly I'm like, no, he is just really impulsive and a risk taker. And I don't know. I think the myth of Elon Musk as a genius is just like fallen apart for so many people. There are some people still holding on to that belief, but
Well, it's not to say he's not
yeah.
a genius in his own right, but it's like same thing with Kanye, right? Like Kanye, like, and it's like, we talk about Michael Jackson and all these kind of figures who we get closer and closer to our heroes or people that we
Uh-huh.
consider brilliant. And it all falls apart. You're like, oh my God, you're anti-Semitic, like it's like, oh my God, you are cool with slave labor. Like what?
Yeah. No, it's
Um,
absurd. Yeah, I
but this
remember back in like when I first got to Stanford, how impressive I thought Elizabeth Holmes was. She
shame.
dropped out when she was just a sophomore. Like maybe I can do that one day. Like it was, and now just to see that crashing down, I think she just epitomizes how much the tech world, because people did worship the tech world back in 2014. It's so interesting how that's like completely switched over.
Well, some people still do. I feel like I
Hmm.
was reading Scott Alexander's blog, Slate Star Codex. Do you remember?
Oh yeah, I know. I like that blog. Yeah.
Yeah, so he did these 3 kind of pieces. It's like a Silicon Valley party and then another Silicon Valley party and then yet another Silicon Valley party.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like showed the evolution of how these like parties have gone. And I feel like the persona of like people who are still in Silicon Valley, who are still in tech and still doing these things is like it's morphed and changed. But that's another fascinating dynamic that I'm interested in. See, this is why I feel like I couldn't stay in academic because I'm too interested in all these different. I want to like peek my head
Hmm.
into all of them and
Hmm.
like, and that's what I'm doing here with you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I'm trying to do academia and the other things as well. We'll see if I can.
You
But yeah,
have
I
more
think
control and restraint than I do. I could tell.
maybe I don't know. I don't know. But I've started like applying to like a few business schools for jobs because they hire a lot of psychologists. Kind of like how they interact with the companies and the world a bit more and stuff. And I really am interested in doing field experiments as well in my own research and doing things that are very applied and have implications. I'm super passionate about social media. That's what I study. That's what I'm on. That's what I do my TikToks on. So it's kind of a fit in that way. But like my research interests are like very applied and things that I want to have an impact on, like how tech companies operate and policies and regulations for social media companies. And like the times when I found like my research to be both most valuable is either when I've communicated to the public about it, or I've spoken to journalists about it, or I've seen people react to it. Or one instance is when Facebook wrote like a press release criticizing one of our studies. And I was like, oh, okay, Facebook has heard of our research and they've listened to it and they don't like it because we're critical of them. But at least we sort of make an impact on the public conversation about what Facebook is doing and what social media companies are incentivizing. So that shows that our research has some impact on the real world. Like that's the stuff that just keeps me inspired because I know that I'm like somehow interacting with these public conversations and real world things instead of just sort of writing these like theory papers that are only read by 2 people in a specific journal.
Yeah, I think that there's certain aspects of academia that allow for more application and
Mhm.
integration. And I think
Mhm.
psychology could be one of those. Because I was looking, I
Mhm.
was like, oh, y'all got a grant from Google for safety and misinformation. That's interesting. Whereas biomedical sciences, in theory, has a lot of juxtaposition to pharma, but a lot of it is studying very basic science stuff that goes absolutely nowhere and spins wheels in a
Mhm.
sense incrementally for decades. So I guess there's just different facets of the university that allow you to have more application. That's why the whole thing is so vast a project to explore because there's just so many different pockets. But I'm interested and fascinated with what you do and really curious to see how the shit plays out for you, my friend.
Thank you. We'll see. Fingers crossed that it plays out well. And I'm curious to see what the future of NeoAcademia is. It would be
Yeah, me
nice if we could
too.
just kind of blur that line between academia and non-academia and not make it such like an isolated
Let's do it.
thing.
Let's hold hands for a minute.
Yes, let's do it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us here on NeoAcademia, where next episode we'll continue to explore the shifting walls of the ivory tower. You can see the full video of this episode on YouTube and sign up to receive episodes, show notes, Readocracy collections, and bonus content straight to your inbox at theorygang.io.